Okay, part four. Part four of my response to reasonable questions for anti-SJWs. Fortunately, part four. I'll make sure of it, don't you worry, out of four. So, okay, let's just crack on with it. No fuck fart or fanning about this time. Professor Philip Moriarty.
What is the number of followers, the number of likes, the number of dislikes, the number of retweets, the number of subscribers, any of those numbers, any of those metrics, what have they got to do with the argument? Deepak Chopra, for example, a man who trots out an endless stream of pseudoscientific quantum woo bollocks, has nearly 3 million followers. So what? Those people follow him because he tells them what they want to hear. Why even mention the number of followers you have? What difference does it make?
Okay, well, what I would say to you, Professor Moriarty, is in terms of kind of truth value, in terms of some philosophical or scientific sense, then I agree with everything you have to say. It bears no relationship whatsoever. It doesn't matter how many subs you've got to the strength of your argument. That's some kind of a argument from appeal to popularity or something like that, and it doesn't make any sense. But there are other kinds of win, right? You can have a scientific or a philosophical win, but you can also have a political win. And perhaps this is the perfect time to bring this up because, of course, there is the presidential election in the United States with this series of debates. And if you look at how the commentators, or the political commenters, I should say, talk about this, they talk about these different levels of win. They talk about who's won the argument, but when they talk about who's won the debate, they also look at that in terms of the political impact and who is going to gain percentage of voters from this and who isn't. And that isn't necessarily who provides the best argument. It can be based on lots and lots of other factors. And this is the point here, is that what we're talking about isn't just social justice, we're talking about social justice warriorism. And this is surely an important factor of being an SJW, is the fact that you have this warriorism and the weapon of choice of the social justice warrior is the pen and not the sword. And of course the pen is mightier than the sword, although I suppose if I was fighting the mountain from Game of Thrones, I'd probably go for a sword. I mean, I suppose you could write a kind of friendly note and try that, but I'd probably go for the sword. But the pen, which is mightier than the sword, or the sort of e-pen, in this instance is the weapon of choice, and the aim of using that pen is to influence hearts and minds. Surely if there is any purpose to social justice warriorism, it is about a hearts and minds campaign. It isn't just in some bollocks exercise in preaching to the choir, in speaking to those, a kind of series of nodding dogs within an echo chamber. Look at all the metaphors I'm mixing together there. Pretty good job of that there. Right? It's about going out there and changing people's opinions. Right? And so in that sense, it's very valid to start bringing up this, because you're not doing a very good job as an SJW if the rhetoric that you use and the way that you approach it is counterproductive. And in fact, it's no good playing even a game of saying, well, I'm only doing the same as the other side, because the other side maybe couldn't give two craps about that. Right? They maybe don't have the same motivations as you have. But if you have those motivations as an SJW, and I think it's those motivations are one of the factors that define somebody as an SJW. If you don't have that warriorism mentality, that mentality to go out there and preach your social justice position, then I wouldn't define you as an SJW in the first place. So in that context, I think it's actually a very, very valid factor.
Why is it that you go on and fucking on about safe spaces and trigger warnings and delicate little flowers, but continue to hide behind your cartoon avatars and your childish pseudonyms? And whenever anyone calls you out on your sexist, racist, homophobic, bigoted rhetoric, you become the argument of your own scorn and are hashtag triggered, as they say.
Well, there's such a lot going on here, really. That chimes in different bits of the videos. Some of the labels, it's one of the reasons that people like to hide behind things, is exactly the kind of labeling that Michael uses here when he talks about things being racist, when you hide behind your racist language and all these kinds of things. Because these are terms that you can apply with very little cost to yourself. This is something I talked about in one of the other parts of the video, where some of the other insults that you can throw in people's ways, some of that shit sticks to yourself, but the kind of labels that Michael's throwing around now, they are trivially easy to throw around, and there's very little impact on the person throwing them around to do it, but quite a lot of impact, whether they're justified or not, on the person who's on the receiving end. And that is one of the reasons why some people hide behind the avatars that they do. And in actual fact, I find it kind of amusing, because one of the other people contributing to this calls themselves Ranting Feminist and is hiding behind this avatar. And also another thing that this chimes in, you've just seen Philip Moriarty there. Now, he doesn't mention this point in this video, but one of his biggest bugbears with people, especially Thunderfoot, especially Sargon of Akkad,
this whole pseudonym nonsense. I just find it ridiculous that a man who's like me, is in his 40s, has to hide behind a pseudonym, and yet at the same time complains about professional victims, at the same time complains about safe spaces. That's a level of hypocrisy that is just remarkable.
Is a fact that they don't use their real names. That's something that really gets under his skin. How pathetic for a middle-aged man like Thunderfoot or Sargon of Akkad, or presumably Madonna or Sting or the Edge out of U2, any of these people to use a pseudonym, to not use their actual name, although he's never mentioned any of these people like the Edge or Madonna, so maybe different rules apply to these people. But the same reason that people like Elton John have used different names apply to people like this. One of the reasons that people like Elton John, people have stage names effectively, is because sometimes their original name's a bit crap, right, and that a stage name will sound a bit more upbeat. But the other reason is that people, often for very reasonable reasons, they want to separate their existence and their contribution within their field from their private life. It might not be for their own, he assumes it's for their own ends, but sometimes it isn't. It's because he talks later, actually Philip Moriarty talks a little bit later in this video about the principle of academic freedom, right? But that doesn't apply to everybody. How fortunate Professor Moriarty is to be in a field where his employers are not going to criticise him for going out there and giving his views, but not everybody has the entitlement and the privilege that Professor Moriarty has there. So they want to keep a degree of separation from their work life and from their employment and from what they do online. And it is the same with their family. Some people's family, the individual might be happy to have the views associated with their name, but it's unfair to impose that on your family when your family doesn't have that online account, when your family doesn't have that YouTuber channel or that large blog that's attracting a lot of traffic. So there's loads and loads of very, very justifiable reasons why people would hide behind an avatar. There's lots of justifiable reasons why people would use a different name, effectively a stage name, on YouTube. And I find what irks me about that, right, is that there is an issue here. There is a real issue here, which is that people use these names and these avatars online to act in ways that they wouldn't act in real life. Now, you can't accuse the Thunderfoots and Sargon Akkads of that, of course, because in actual fact, in many ways, their rhetoric has become more robust since everybody's learnt their name than before they did. But there are a great many people who hide behind that shield of anonymity and use that shield of anonymity to bully people and to try and make people's lives a misery and to threaten people. And that is a real issue. Okay, and so you've got this kind of tension going on here, because on the one hand you've got the benefits of this kind of anonymity, and on the other hand you've got the fact that it can be abused, and there's this tension that goes on there. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know what the answer is. You've got more intelligent people in great number working for Google, and they can't work out. They tried to do something with YouTube where they were going to link everybody's Google Plus with their real name into their YouTube account, and it caused uproar. Why? Because for all these legitimate reasons, there are many legitimate reasons why people would not want to do that. So I don't know what the answer is, but what I do know is this. and I'm addressing this more to the kind of Professor Moriarty points that he didn't make in this video, but that I'm talking about now, rather than what Michael Rowlands had just said. But of all the important, legitimate issues to do with anonymity, with due to not showing your face, or to do with using a different, effectively a stage name on YouTube, of all the legitimate reasons, the fact that it's a little bit pathetic for a middle-aged man to do it ranks so low that it beggars belief that that is the thing that you would major on.
Are you willing to publicly acknowledge and admonish the massive amount of hatred, bullying, harassment, and intimidation that a lot of your fans infringe upon people? And I don't mean these tiny disclaimers that you put under the description fold or flash for 2 seconds at the beginning of the video that you know nobody reads. I mean a public and ongoing anti-bullying stance. Or do you kind of like watching your fans go around harassing people and calling them slurs and telling them to kill themselves? You kind of like it, don't you? I mean, if that's your thing, and I guess that's just what you're into, just makes you a dick.
It's so tempting to respond with all bullying matters, to be honest, on this one, because let's be honest, in terms of these dog piles, some of the most celebrated examples have been SJW types piling on people, especially on Twitter, you know, for wearing the wrong, scientists wearing the wrong shirt, or saying something that they objected to in an after dinner speech or what have you, and making their lives a misery, ending their careers or their reputations, being screwed up in some circumstances, often on things which have been misreported or misinterpreted, it has to be said. But look, the objectionable part that I have with you is that I just don't recognise how your comment applies to me, or the way that I treat the people who come and watch. I'm not going to call them fans, because they're not fans. They're people who have probably got much better things to do with their time generally than watch my videos, but it's been a really slow news day. They've thought, I'm going to go on YouTube. They've looked at their videos that have come up that day, and there's just literally nothing better to watch than the crap I've come out with. Or they meant to perhaps click on the video next to mine and kind of slip with a mouse as they clicked on it. I think that's generally what happens, but I always encourage them to go and watch the original. I know some people, because of the kind of things that you're saying now, don't do that. They won't even link to the original anymore for fear of being accused of the kind of accusations you're making there of encouraging a dog pile. But you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, because if you link to the original, then there's accusations of a dog pile. If you don't link to the original, then them little clips that you've included, right, you know, they could be very quote-miney clips, couldn't they? That you could be taking it out of context, and I always say, go and watch the original, check that what I'm saying is not out of context. What I will say, I'll say it now, I've said it 1,000 times before, don't go to that video and insult people. Don't go into that video and troll people. Don't go to that video and be nasty. Go to that video and watch it. If you have legitimate criticisms, if you want to argue with the person that's made that video and criticise what they've done, then there's nothing wrong with doing that. If you want to make videos, if you want to put your thoughts on a video, put it on YouTube, right, and you don't want any criticism, set it to private, set it to unlisted. But if you want to make that video public, then I'm afraid that's just part and parcel of making a public video on YouTube, is that you're setting that video up to attract criticism, and that's just something that you're going to have to take on board, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I'm certainly not going to dissuade people away from doing that. If you're not happy with my stance there, well then come back and tell me about it, but I certainly don't encourage my viewers to go and dogpile or to insult other people, and if they're doing it, well then I don't really want them to be doing it in my name.
You do realise that you're as much of a social justice warrior as those you critique. It's just that you espouse a different form of social justice, a rather less considerate, rather less forgiving, rather less kind form of social justice.
So he'd missed a bit off there, which I've left because I just agree with him. He says, make sure you do all your homework, do your research, check out your sources, blah, 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 blah. And it doesn't matter what that, I absolutely agree with him. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about rape statistics or whether you're talking about the tampon tax. Make sure you've done your research, and certainly don't do some of the howlers that I've seen some people do, like give quotations as if they'd read the original document when the bit that they've actually quoted only actually exists on a Wikipedia page that points to that document. You wouldn't want to be doing anything as face palming as that, especially not if you was an academic. But the reason that I played you this second chunk is because he's talking about social justice and about how, well, we're all social justice. It was just that some people's social justice is a bit more mean-spirited. And the reason I want to play that is because it chimes in with what Kristi Winter says on this next chunk. So let's have a little bit more Kristi.
If you identify as an egalitarian, then I'm interested in your take on the usefulness of the concept of the original position as laid out by John Rawls in his theory of justice.
So this is a really interesting question you've asked here, Kristi, and this will be the last major thing that I'll tackle here on this video. Thank you for putting the project together. Very interesting project, and it's allowed some interesting things to be discussed. So thank you for that. First off, let's just get it out of the way. I don't label myself as an egalitarian, but whether you do or not, it's still a really interesting concept, this John Rawls concept of original position, and I think a lot more people will be familiar with it than realise they're familiar with it. It's this idea, let me just bastardise it now and give you a sort of a kind of bastardised run through of it. Imagine if you're up there, you're floating above all of humanity and you're going to embody somebody, right? But you don't know where you're going to be in society, what your position is going to be, what you're going to be, where you're going to function. Will you live in an inner city? Will you live in the countryside? Will you be a black person or a white person? Will you be rich? Will you be poor? Will you be male? Will you be female? Will you have a fully functional body or won't you? You don't know what your situation will be. You don't know what privileges you'll have, what disprivileges you have. You don't know what abilities you have, you don't know what disabilities you will have. So what rules would you want given that kind of epistemically challenged position? What would you regard as fair? What would you regard as equitable? What would you regard as justice under those situations? And the idea being that if we formulate a set of rules from that position, then that's maybe the fairest set of rules. It's a little bit like the kind of ethical idea of the ideal observer, in that you're taking the standpoint or the prejudices out from individual, real life, messy observers and sort of taking that, stepping apart from all of that and looking at it from a little bit more from distance. So I find it a really interesting concept. But what I've got to say is, Kristi, the fact that you're asking that leads me to think that you think that if I consider things from that position, that that's going to draw me more firmly towards adopting the same ideas with regard to social justice that you have. In actual fact, when I consider things from that position, it doesn't really change my position very much. I mean, it does to some degree, because I accept that I have my prejudices and biases the same as everybody does. It's no simple, magical sort of stroke of luck that most people that have wealth vote for parties that benefit people with wealth. It's no stroke of luck that people that don't have much wealth vote for parties that benefit those that don't have wealth. That those that pay a lot of tax vote for low tax parties, and those that pay bugger all tax are more than happy to see tax rates raised for the rich, right? It's no quirk of fate that it's people voting, let's be honest, in either case, whether you're right or left wing, whether you vote for whichever kind of socio-economic policies, most people are voting at least with an eye on self-interest. So of course it is. But there's a lot more to it than that, the differences between people's positions. There's also whether you kind of favour evolution or revolution. There's whether you feel that the ends justify the means in terms of the things that you do. And of course, Philip Moriarty said that these things he's talking about mean-spirited, but you can have significant differences in your social justice position and still reasonably claim to be social justice or pro-social justice without being mean-spirited. Certainly in terms of evolution versus revolution, some people want change and they want change now, and it's got to be absolute change. Some of us are a little bit more concerned about that. We want change to be a little bit more organic. Now, organic change can happen fast, such as perhaps has happened in my country with regard to the way that we view homosexuality. That's actually happened surprisingly fast. Attitudes have changed, and changed in a fairly organic manner. But in other things, it's going to take time. Any change that you want to make to the way that people function in the workplace with regard to any discrepancies that you see there is going to take decades to filter through, because people are already ensconced in that workplace under the kind of circumstances where they joined the workplace. So some things will take longer than others. Some might happen in a couple of years. Some might take decades after decades. I'm a gradualist, right? And you can criticise me for being a gradualist in those terms, and you can say we need to, and I love to say this, revolve rather than evolve in social circumstances, but I see a lot of dangers with regard to that. I think you can overshoot your position. I think you can soon end up going down a blind alley and not realising before you've gone too far, and I think you don't necessarily represent the best outcome at the end of it, and you don't necessarily get the most certain outcome within society. I think the outcome can end up a little bit more shaky if you've got at it a little bit too hard, a little bit too fast in an artificial way. And sometimes I don't think the ends justify the means, even if the ends themselves might seem like a social justice position. So taxing the rich until they fucking bleed, as we did in the 50s, 60s and 70s, some people will say that is a social justice position because it's equalising the amount of wealth everybody has. You tax the wealthy 70%, 80%, 90%, and you give that to the poor. That's a social justice outcome because everybody then has a more equal amount of money. But for me, that's not a social justice position, because although the ends might seem social justice-like, the means that you have used to achieve that resolutely, in my view, are not. That taxing people those kinds of rates, and I'm not a higher rate taxpayer, right? So I'm not saying that with self-interest. That's not justice, taxing people those kinds of rates. And even if I disembody myself, and I don't know whether I'm a rich person or a poor person or somewhere in between, and as it is, I'm somewhere in between, I just pay basic rate tax, I still regard it as unethical to set tax rates like that. So even if the ends, which is a more equitable distribution of income, might seem like a social justice position, I don't think the ends justify the means. So do I think do I have some time for that way of thinking of things? Yes. John Rawls, good work there, John Rawls, something to consider. But does that necessarily mean we're all going to drift towards a Kristi Wintersonian style take on social justice? No, I don't think that it does. I think we're still going to have quite significant differences in the way that we approach things.
Do you really think you can spend your entire life in a perpetual state of emotional immaturity? Do you actually imagine that you will be able to perpetuate your adolescence for your entire existence? Wait, didn't somebody else ask this one? Wait, I gotta... fuck.
Okay, so this is going to be the end of my video. That was the end of their video. So that's maybe a good one to end on. A little light-hearted one. And yeah, I've never... To answer your questions there, no, I don't want to spend the rest of my life in a state of emotional immaturity. Specifically, what I'd much rather do is spend the rest of my life in a state of immaturity generally, and who wouldn't? Because let's be honest, there's a lot more fun in not growing up than there is in growing up and dealing with the harsh realities of life. Fortunately, it's not always quite as simple as that. Okay, well that concludes not just this video but the full 4 parts of the video. I hope you've enjoyed all 4 parts. If you've watched them, if you're not subscribed, then you could always subscribe. If you've really enjoyed the series, you might consider sponsoring my output and the time that it takes to make these videos on Patreon. In any event, thank you very, very much for watching this series. Bye for now.